everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of How to Build a Game Studio. I am Trevor Oz, and this week I am joined by our first voice actress and our first Australian. We have Aimee Smith. How are you today, Aimee?
Yeah, really good. So cool to hear that I fit two new categories too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to expand who we talk to on the podcast, so you're checking a couple boxes on the bucket list there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Something a bit different.
Yeah, I like to talk to different people about different types of things, and I think having a voice actress on is definitely different than just talking about the behind the scenes game dev stuff. So I'm excited to have you on.
Oh yeah, for sure. Creating a different perspective on it all. So no, it should be really good.
Yeah, it's always nice to hear from like every little aspect because there's so much that goes into a game. So it's really cool to have those different perspectives from different types of people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, with game developers, it's their baby for like, oh gosh, upwards of 2 years in a lot of cases. And voice actors just kind of sneak in on the end and just it's their baby for about a week and and then they visit it occasionally. So yeah, it's definitely a different perspective. It's a lot of fun.
Definitely. So when it comes to games, Aimee, have you always been into video games?
Yeah, very much so. But funny enough, it wasn't like a blatantly obvious career path for me. Like I know a
Hmm.
lot of people now, they're like, oh yeah, they grew up with games, and so as a result, they wanted to be that person who was voicing for games of their childhood. It wasn't as blatantly obvious to me. It was really only looking back. Retrospectively, where I was kind of like, oh my goodness, look at all these things along my path that have informed what I'm doing today. But yeah, I mean, like obviously, games were a really, really big part of our childhood. Like we had a computer room that had like three computers linked up to play Age of Empires and Medal of Honor and all those other cool things. But I would always play them with my dad and my brother. So a lot of our game choices were kind of more steered towards them, and I would be watching on the sidelines. But by way of games that I played myself, like obviously Crash Bandicoot, the Spyro series. But I think that the first game that I played that was really mine and wasn't so much a shared experience with my family was The Misadventures of Tron Bon. I don't know. Have you heard of it before?
Yeah, that's a Mega Man spinoff, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's how everybody knows it to be.
Yeah.
For me, that was just its own entity, and I actually played Mega Man Legends purely because she had appeared in the game.
Hmm.
So yeah, my love of it kind of came from a reverse, um, typical normative perspective. But I just absolutely loved it. I played the crap out of my game at that game, and it was actually a present from my uncle. And I don't think he ever realized just how much of a role that game had in my childhood. I played it multiple times. And yeah, like I mean, I even have like a little Tron Bon figure here in my home, and I'm still hoping for some sort of like re-release. It was just amazing to me. So that was a huge part of my childhood.
Yeah, it'd be really cool to see that re-released. I know they re-released like Mega Man Legends on the PlayStation Store
Mhm.
as like a PS1 classic at one point, but yeah, I don't think they've ever re-released that, which
Yeah,
is
yeah,
it.
I think that'll just need to satisfy my cravings for a bit. Then I'll just purchase it on the PlayStation.
Yeah, there you go, there you go. Play the old PS1 classic there,
Yeah,
and
I'll
get
need to.
get
I need my
some
fix.
get a fix of Mega Man Legends. That's how I know Trombone because I haven't played the Misadventures of, but I did play Mega Man Legends back in the day, which I have that re-release, and I should probably check it back out again because it's been a long time.
Oh yeah, it's a great one. But I think the PlayStation One like original disc for the Misadventures of Tron Bon is selling for like $200 on
Oh,
eBay last time I checked. So I was like, I'm so tempted because I specifically kept my PlayStation One for that, like as a just in
mm.
case. But now I don't have it anymore. But yeah, I was seriously tempted.
Yeah, that's crazy. It must not have had a huge print run on that. That's why it's so expensive.
Yeah, well, I'd never known anybody who actually knew it as its own entity, but
Mm.
now as an adult, like I find that I talk about it quite a lot on Twitter and stuff, and I'm finding people actually had heard of the game before. So it's really exciting. I was like, where were these people when I was younger?
Well, they were in their own little corners talking about
Yeah.
that game and nobody knowing what they were talking about. So that's how
Oh,
the
yeah.
internet lets us connect,
Oh,
especially with
yeah.
those smaller games.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I actually think my uncle had gotten it potentially overseas, so maybe that's why a lot of people in Australia hadn't necessarily heard of it. But who knows? That was my little gem. But yeah, like I think that game experience had definitely ventured off into me absolutely loving games, particularly with strong protagonists and things like that. Like I love the Life is Strange series. I love Danganronpa. Like there are yeah, I still love games today. But yeah, obviously without the dad and brother now, it's my own passion and interest.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. So you said that you didn't think that was gonna you were gonna get into games. What did you think you were gonna do?
Well, back in 2011, so after I finished high school, I was actually training to be a primary school teacher.
Oh wow.
Um, so yeah, I did not for a second think that I would be voice acting in games. It just never really clicked for me. But yeah, I did do stage community theater. Like I loved performing. Like it was just this love that I had. And I found that while I was studying and working and all those sorts of things, I couldn't do community theater anymore. And I like screen wasn't quite how I envisioned it to be. It wasn't really
Mm.
my thing. And yeah, I ended up coming across voice acting like on a typical Google search. It was kind of just like a ticker box that I've tried this, and oh, I hadn't even thought about this for a second. And then yeah, I basically just started doing a few little hobby jobs on the Voice Acting Club and Voice Acting Alliance, and picked up a few of these, and then ventured into some paid jobs, and then yeah, it's only been this year where I've turned it into a full-time pursuit. So it's really just been a strange looking back on my journey and thinking like, how did I not connect? Like, how did I not connect all these little pieces along the way? It's just mental. Like it seems so obvious now, but
Hmm.
yeah, I didn't realize until yeah, looking back basically.
Well, I think a lot of us have that journey where we don't realize where we're gonna end up. I mean, for me, I left high school and started working retail, and then just got caught up in the hey, I'm working this job now, and I'm slowly moving up in the company. So maybe that's just what I'm gonna do now. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Kind of just, yeah, get caught up in the swing of things, and however life pushes you into different avenues, you're just like, all right, I'll just let it happen. And sometimes you need to take a moment and think, is this what I want to do? Is there something else I'm perhaps missing? Because there's obviously so many different career paths out there, and a lot of which we never get to try. So you never know what you're actually really good at.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So for you, you discovered that you wanted to do voice acting in 2011. Did you start? Was the first thing you did a game, or was it something else?
It was actually a little animation flash. That's the first released project that had come out. I can't remember what my first audition was.
Hmm.
But yeah, like still to this day, the majority of my work is in video games. But yeah, as I said, like I didn't think that would be the thing to click with me until looking back. Um, so yeah, it's pretty strange.
So for the audition process, was it for even stage, or did you try to do a little bit of screen and you just didn't feel it, or?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely loved stage. I was really passionate about that. And I kind of just thought, oh yeah, screen is just another like branch of performance. Like I'm obviously
Mhm.
going to love that because I love other aspects of performing. And like admittedly, I probably didn't give it enough of a try. I was just a little extra in this um TV show that I don't think ever aired in Australia anyway. But I just remember being there on set and was just like, I don't like this. And I can't even explain why. Like I remember defining it at the time as being incredibly repetitive, and I was like, but
Mhm.
that doesn't make sense because I'm doing voice acting now, and that can be really repetitive. And I was kind of like, oh, maybe it's because I was a little extra role. Right? Maybe I'd feel differently if I was a lead or a minor role. Like who knows? And I was just like, no, I still don't think I'd like it. Um, and then I think I realized that with voice acting, it's incredibly liberating and there's no discrimination and there's no barriers as to what you can and can't be. And I like the fact that I can be a dog or an alien or a little boy or like, I love that. I love the freedom with voice acting. So yeah, but it was something I all kind of discovered later. I'll never quite know why I didn't like Scream because obviously I wasn't discriminated against, but I think I just anticipated the inevitable. And I was just like, just based on what I'd heard, I just don't think it's for me.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, but that's something a lot of people don't always realize, that hey, this isn't for me. So.
Oh yeah, I'm glad I did though because it was to me, yep, something I wanted to do for sure. And then as soon as I tried it, I was like, okay, if I don't love this, there's no way this is gonna work. And sometimes it's like you've built it up to be such a dream in your head, and and yeah, you just realize the reality is quite different. And I think like I run a lot of video game workshops and I do panels
Mhm.
about how to get involved in voice acting, and I think I can see. it in a lot of people as well, where they've built up this huge dream but haven't actually tried it in practice yet. So I really recommend, like, you need to try what that dream is first before letting it get too huge where you feel like you can't back out of it.
Yeah, that's a smart way to look at it, especially because, like you said, there's this dream. It's you build it up in your head, and then you think that this is what I want to do, and then you actually try it, and it's like, I really didn't want to do this.
Yeah, the reality is often quite different. I mean, even in terms of, like, as I'd said, people coming up to me and talking about voice acting, and they think it's the most glamorous thing ever. And I'm like, it's really not. I just spend like X amount of hours in my booth every single, quite a lonely experience, which a lot of people don't come to really think about. They don't actually visualize, okay, what is it like to do this full time? So I think, yeah, I don't know why glamour kind of comes into a job like this. It's not glamorous at all.
Right. Um, so for you, how did how different is the audition process for like a screen for screen or stage compared to a voice actor?
Oh, how is it different? Oh gosh, in so many different avenues. Like, I think I was talking a bit about discrimination. Like,
Hmm.
obviously for stage and screen, like, I can't talk too much about screen. I've only had the one experience with it.
Yeah.
But for stage, like, you're automatically going to be judged as to how you can fit those specs right away. Um, Obviously it's quite intimidating too. You're on a stage and you're performing in front of, I mean, for community theatre, it kind of involved everybody who was about to audition. So there's like, I don't know, 50 people, a little over that, including the people who are judging you. So yeah, that's really scary. Like, obviously nerves get a hold of you, but with voice acting, it's a very intimate experience. And I'm primarily an online voice talent as well. So there's nobody staring at me. It's kind of
Hmm.
just the most liberating, like, let's just put everything I have into this. Nobody cares how my face looks. Nobody cares that my arms are flapping about. It's just me and a microphone, in a box, basically. um, yeah, and in the end, I think with the community theatre aspect, obviously those panel of people want you to succeed, but when you're performing in front of other people who are going to be auditioning first, so in a more amateur type of field, they're not necessarily wanting you to succeed, like, not
Hmm.
inherently. But with voice acting, when it's just you, the client, the audio engineer, they want you to succeed. So I find that the complete energy shifts from community theatre by way of voice. It's just a lot nicer of a community. We share resources, we praise each other's success, and I just think there's a very different energy with theatre and stage.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Something I wouldn't have really thought about actually is the community aspect, the how you're collaborating on each project.
Yeah, yeah, and the community is absolutely huge. And I find that the people who don't celebrate other people's success and don't share resources and kind of just want to take, they're not the norm. They're kind of the exceptions,
Hmm.
which I think is really nice. Whereas obviously, well, not obviously. I mean, I don't know the industry well enough, but I feel that it kind of shifts the other way in other avenues of acting.
Yeah, I just at least from what I know about film and everything, it just seems that a lot of it is very ego centric. People want to fuel their own ego, and they're not worried about everybody else. They're just trying to get their own thing together and book their own gigs and be a big star.
Yeah, yeah, and I totally get that. I mean, voice acting is still competitive. Some people
Hmm.
say that it isn't. Some people say, like, just look at everybody as your friend. And I mean, in reality, in the pro world, yeah, it still is competitive. But in the end, like, it's still fun competitive. It's still like,
Hmm.
okay, I lost today. Maybe I'll win against this person tomorrow. And it's just like, you don't hate that person. You wish them no animosity at all. And like, then the following day, it's kind of like, hey, I feel like you would be a better fit for this particular job than I would. And that's kind of just the energy. In the end, you're not going to be the right fit for everything. And there needs to be a huge level of acceptance for that. And if you don't have resilience, I just don't think you have the temperament to do this. You still need to be really good natured. You still need to share. You still need to bounce back when you don't get cast. Um, and I just think voice actors do that a lot better. Maybe because we audition like 10 to 20 times a day for different projects. So you learn to let the small stuff go. So maybe that has something to do with it as well. Whereas you can't necessarily do that with stage.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. So you audition 10 to 20 times a day. Is that
Oh, not all the time.
mm,
There have been some times for sure. Some people do more, some people do a lot less. But we're doing it full time now. Like obviously, I'm working on a couple of audiobooks at the moment, so I'm not
okay?
auditioning up to 20 times. I won't have time for that. Um, but yeah, I still try to aim for about 10, more 5 to 10 for me personally at this time. But when I'm less busy, then yeah, sometimes closer to 15. But yeah, it really depends. And I think with doing stuff like that, you come to just shake off and forget about some of those auditions. You have to, or you'd go insane. Um, so yeah, so I think that contributes to the good natured aspect of it all.
Yeah, that would definitely help because you're not constantly beating yourself up over one project that you didn't get because there's several other projects coming on the horizon that you could.
Yeah, precisely. If you only had two big auditions that week, that would drive you mental. So yeah, it's pretty much just keep auditioning until you forget about all those other jobs. You just yeah, you can't get stuck on it at all.
Okay, so you started with an animation short there for voice acting. Where did you go from there? Did you how did you get yourself out there enough to start working on a game?
Oh goodness. So Eclipse Force, which was the name of the animation, it was created by an animator called Chakra X, who is on Newgrounds and has like quite a good following on YouTube and everything. So I was very lucky to get that as my first job. I found that I still did a lot of auditioning on Newgrounds, did a lot of auditioning on the Voice Acting Club and on the Voice Acting Alliance, and then I kind of just kept widening my net and ensuring that I didn't put all my eggs in one basket. I mean, today there are so many voice acting subreddits on Reddit, and there is like lots of discords that offer paid and unpaid voice audition opportunities. And there's Twitter, which is a huge one as well. Um, Admittedly, I can't remember my first video game opportunity for the life of me. But really, Freedom Planet is the main one that sticks out to me. I think that was the first proper video game that I did end up being cast in, that ended up being a commercial release as well. And I was quite fortunate. So that was the year after I'd started. So back in 2012. So my life would have been very different today had I not been cast in that game.
Yeah, so I know you just started this year doing it full time. What were you doing on the side?
Oh, well, I was primary school teaching, so I did that for the
Okay.
5 years. So I basically was like a casual teacher for 1 year, then I was a full-time teacher for a couple, and then in 2016, Stephen had, the developer of Freedom Planet, had gotten in contact with us all and had basically said, "Okay, would love you all to come to Dallas and record for Freedom Planet too." And admittedly, I said no initially, which sounds absolutely crazy because I also wanted
Yeah.
my partner at the time to go with me. But anyway, talked it all through and it ended up happening. And I was still looking at voice acting as a hobby at this stage.
Mhm.
So went over, recorded at the Okratron 5000, met Dawn Bennett and Alejandro Saab and Stephen and just so many wonderful people and got to understand the community over there. And when I come back, I kind of just went, oh my goodness, I need to start doing this properly. Because it just reignited something in me, basically. And I officially went part time with my job at the beginning of the following year. And I was like, what steps do I need to take to officially make this as a business? So it was a bit of a long, drawn out road, but I am quite organized as being a teacher and I like to
Mhm.
schedule things and look at financial projections and all that sort of thing. And I didn't want to just jump. So it was definitely quite a few years until I went, okay, I physically can't do this part time anymore. It was becoming too insane. I was starting to do conventions and things. And then this year I was like, okay, I think I'll be okay. This is the dollar amount that I need to make every week in order to ensure that I still feel successful because I think that's the hardest thing with going full time. It's just constantly thinking I'm not doing well enough because
Mhm.
in your first year of taking on any business, you are by no means going to be making the same amount as your full time stable job. It's just not going to happen. And so I'm quite aware that, yeah, it's probably going to take 3 years in order to get there and surpass it. Um, so realistic goals were incredibly important, ensuring I had repeat clients, ensuring that I kept upping my rates whenever I would upgrade my equipment and my demo reels. And so, yeah, I was definitely realistic. And in the end, when I found out that I ended up exceeding my goals. And I think a lot of people talk about voice acting from the performance element, but not so much from the business element. I found that was the hardest part to upskill getting ready to be a full-time voice actor.
Yeah, that's smart. It's smart to think about it from the business aspect and make sure that you can actually support yourself, but being realistic in your goals.
Yeah, I mean, I say it all the time in my workshops, and I feel so bad because I feel like I'm going around to all the starry-eyed people and just bringing them back down to earth because I pretty much give all this information away in workshops. I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
here are the websites if you're just getting started. If you're looking at this as like a part-time business, here's where you can go next. And if you are taking this as a business, here are the talent rosters you can go to. Here we're talking about agencies. And people are like, oh my goodness, all this information. Yes, I can make it. And then straight after that, I have like the honest truth slide where I basically talk about like all these quotes that I've said before or things that you need to ask yourself in order to be like, okay, can I realistically go home, make my home studio and start being a full-time voice actor tomorrow? No, I don't believe so. Um, so I definitely believe that being a voice talent is more than just it's more than just passion. It's not more than just being starry-eyed. It's more than just having that knowledge. You actually need to do something with it. And I constantly say hustle and heart, and a dash of realism as well. Not to say that anybody can't do it, but just in okay, can you realistically sustain yourself just by doing this? What are you going to do if you do have no voice work one day or you're sick? Like, what's your backup plan? And yeah, there's a lot of questions that people need to ask themselves, and it's tricky when people ask me how are you a full-time voice talent now. I very much do launch into the business side because I feel like that overtakes just the passion of wanting to perform, because in all honesty, you're not in a booth 9 hours every day performing. That's
Hmm.
not how it works. So yeah, so I feel it's always really important to talk about that business side as well, because that's really the most important part, distinguishing the people who do make it and don't. I firmly believe that.
Yeah, so on the business end, you obviously had to establish some sort of business. I'm sure you've set up an actual, legitimate business through. I'm not sure exactly how Australia works for that sort of thing, um, but what kind of challenges did you face in the actual setup process?
Oh my goodness, so many in terms of like how much money to put away for tax. I think that completely changes how you end up charging for your work, because a
Mm.
lot of people think, oh, okay, yep, like $100 Australian per hour is a great rate, and I'm like, okay, well, yeah, like compared to like obviously with being a teacher and stuff, yeah, it's a great rate, but then you obviously need to take off like your 30% to tax and the fact that you're not being paid superannuation and all those sorts of things. So I began to get very realistic about how much I was charging for my work, and quite aware that I needed to up it based on the fact that it is a skill.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so that was a big thing, and it was hard for obviously some developers to wrap their heads around it. And I think that's a big distinction, because in Australia, if you're earning under 18,200, I believe it is, like you don't need to pay tax on any of that. So you're basically, that's the tax free threshold, you're fine. But as soon as you start earning over that, then it's like, okay, you legitimately do need to start looking at how much you put aside for super, how much for tax. So that was a big thing by way of creating my rate card. Other things is I like invoicing, like I was doing PDF invoices, and then I'm like, okay, no, I want something that actually tracks how much is returning to me. So I ended up going to QuickBooks and being quite aware that even though there's a payment every month, that's all tax deductible as well. So making sure that I've got all my receipts together. And marketing is a huge side of it as well. So every single day I will market to new prospective leads. Um, one afternoon a week, it's pretty much dedicated to LinkedIn. One afternoon a week is Twitter. One afternoon a week is all the Facebook groups. Another week it was using the game dev map and being very aware that work isn't going to always come to me, and that I need to go out and find it, even when you do have an agent. So all of that took a very long time to learn.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you mentioned, going out there and throwing your name out to leads and marketing yourself, because that's the whole reason I'm talking to you right now, is because
Yeah,
of that.
exactly.
So I mean,
Yeah, that's
because
huge.
you emailed our studio to see what we're looking for. I mean, I honestly don't know if we're gonna have voice work at all in our game coming up, but
This is still a beautiful opportunity, though.
yeah. I mean, honestly, like it's cool to talk to you, and hopefully, someone will listen to this and say, hey, she has a great voice. Let's hire her for something. So that would make me feel real great about it.
Oh, I'll be sure to let you know then if something like that comes flying back. I feel like I need to amp it up now. I'm being like super casual with my talking. Time to perform.
Throw on the performance switch. Um, you're doing it full time now. Obviously, talking to developers, basically cold emailing is working out pretty well for you.
Yeah, sometimes it's a small part of my marketing plan every week. But sometimes it can just be checking in with clients that I've already worked with before. And it's like, oh, I've kind of let like a few months slide by. Like, how about I get in touch with them and like see what they're up to basically. But yeah, I find that like Twitter is absolutely amazing too. So I find that some days I don't need to market as much as others. It would depend on the auditions that pop up of a day. But yeah, like in one way or another, and there's so many ways to market yourself. It could be a matter of like putting your website in a site that you haven't tried before. It could
Mhm.
be a matter of updating that website and doing updates through Wix. And I don't know, there's so many different things that you can do. So yeah, like cold emailing is certainly a part of it. Check in with clients that you've already worked with, updating your website, tweeting. I know that sounds silly, but like that is still a way of marketing in clever different ways, not necessarily like here's my commission rate sheet, here's my commission rate sheet. Like some
Right.
people kind of do that constantly. And I'm like, no, that's not quite the way you do it. Like actively talk about the stuff that you're working on because the people who are fans of your work are going to be interested in that. But it also might hook in a few new people who are like, oh, I've actually got a character that sounds exactly like that, but with a different accent. Like, how about I get in touch? And those sorts of things. So yeah. Yeah, marketing is such a broad topic, but it's something I'm incredibly interested in. I just find it really fascinating how it works and the interesting ways in which you can do it. I know some people are really cool with merchandise. I would
Hmm.
love to get into that aspect of marketing.
Yeah. That's something we're gonna have to figure out sooner or later here
Yeah.
within the next year or two. So I'll have to look at that. I mean, I've already started to look at stuff, as far as pricing and that sort of thing, and figuring out the numbers and man, it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is. It's a really pricey venture, but no, I think it's cool. Some people do it really well. Like at the
Hmm.
course that I just taught at, they had pens. So it just said Voices of Tomorrow. And I was like, oh, I love this. And now I use it all the time. And I think of them, and that's what they want. Like,
Yeah,
it's so
exactly. Yeah.
clever.
Yeah, it's trying to find just that one thing that'll spark someone's interest, and sometimes that's difficult, but when you get it,
Yeah.
you get it.
Yeah, that's it. Like, kind of one of the only things that I've started to do, but I'm still not quite brave enough, is I have a few voiceover T-shirts. And
Hmm.
I've like obviously a few games that I voice into, like they have some merchandise, so I'll occasionally wear that. But it's cool. Like, it's a good conversation starter. And just staying at the top of people's mind. I'm not very good at doing it because as I said, I'm not very brave with it. But some people are great at it, and like obviously they'll put up those photos on social media and make those connections in person too for people who ask them. And so there's so many different ways you can do it. Even some people like they might have a full-time job and they do voice acting on the side. Like they'll have a mug that talks about their service. So whenever they're in the staff room, people are like, oh, okay, where did that mug come from? You're a voice actor? What? And yeah, it's just basically getting those conversations started.
Yeah, talking to people about what you're doing. That's
Hmm.
that's pretty much the marketing 101 there in a sense. But
Yeah, that's what it is.
I think it's something a lot of people just don't think of, when it comes
Yeah,
down to it. Um,
yeah, sure.
So I would say probably a big part of your business is your equipment, um, and I'm sure that was a big expense too. Uh,
Ooh, yeah, it was.
so you say you have your own setup at home. I'm assuming.
Yeah, I do. Because yeah, I don't find that I go out to studios recording jobs. On the few occasions in which it has come up, they
Hmm.
found out I have a home studio and they're like, "Oh, that's so much cheaper for us. You can just record at home and therefore like we don't need to pay those in-studio session fees." And I'm like, "Oh, because like I love it here, don't get me wrong, but
Yeah.
I'm also quite an extroverted person. It's actually not in my temperament to do a job from home, and I know that's a lot of people's dream, but it just was never mine. I just love performing. Um, so yeah, so it was a bit like, oh, I would really love a studio home outside of my home studio. I really wanted that. But no, unfortunately, they just see it as such a huge advantage to having my own. And it is wonderful. I've upgraded my equipment about 3 times over the years since I
Mhm.
started in 2011. So I started with a Samsung CO3U, which was like a little USB microphone and like no atmospheric treatment around me. I was just under a staircase. And then basically reinvested that money, and then I got an XLR microphone. So I had my Sennheiser MK4, and then I had like acoustic foam panels behind me. So that's like a slow upgrade with the microphone and with the atmosphere as well. And then it was only until the beginning of this year where my husband was wonderful and he helped me build my own home studio. So it's like fully constructed. And then I got a Neumann TLM 103 and a monitor in my booth and everything. So I can do like dubbing, like just in case and stuff like
Mhm.
that. So yeah, it was a very slow, very expensive process. Once again, all tax deductible, which is
Yeah.
cool. But yeah, it was like we're talking 8 years to kind of get here. But I know some people, if they've got the money, they kind of just skip straight away to that third step. I still recommend taking that time, not necessarily 8 years, but at least a few years to determine if this is what you want to do, because it is very expensive up front if you want to go straight to stage three.
Yeah, I mean that just comes back in a circle here, where we just talked about maybe not just jump in with both feet and spend thousands of dollars on equipment. Maybe start a little lower than that, and then ease your way up as you get more experience and book more gigs.
Yeah, for sure. Because I met a few people over in the workshops and they would say things like, oh, yeah, like I've got the full whisper room, I've got the Neumann, I've got like all this sort of stuff. And then they'll turn around right away and say, I'm a full time voice actor. And I'll kind of go, okay, well, what have you booked? And they're like, oh, nothing yet. So I find that really difficult because that's the assumption that you can buy your way into being a voice actor. And really, like you wouldn't have that with many other jobs in terms of like, oh yeah, I've just got the equipment, so yep, this is my job now. Because like with anything, you still are doing a course for 4 years in order to be a teacher. You're still doing a
Mhm.
course, an apprenticeship for 4 years in order to be an electrician. And I wouldn't be as stringent with that with voice acting, but I do believe you need to find out if you're bookable first, and you need to have that training before launching into something like that. Like you could do it for a year, find that you're making close to nothing and you're not meeting that tax free threshold. And yeah, and you're kind of just like, okay, where do I go from here? So that's really scary. But I know people who have legitimately done that. Um, so yeah, so that's why I always say a level of realism and taking the steps to figure out if this is for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean that definitely seems like the smart thing to do. And is that uh, so you do workshops, um, as you've mentioned. Is that something that you kind of go over in your workshop?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's a very new thing. I've done the convention route for the last year.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually on my way to like a conference and a convention over in Melbourne. I'm based in Sydney, where I got contacted from Voices of Tomorrow, who run a coaching service, and they said, "Okay, in the week that you're here in Melbourne, would you like to teach a voiceover workshop?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'd love to." And this was last month, and then they asked me to do. I went back this month and did two more. So it's a very new thing, but I do feel, particularly in Australia, that that information does need to get out there because there's not a lot of people in Australia who are in the video game scene. So it's slowly getting better, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, do you work with a lot of devs out of Australia?
I do as of this year, actually, because my work kind of took a bit of a reverse approach than a lot of other voice talent in Australia because we primarily have commercial and corporate. They're the two big avenues. That's what our agencies book for voice talent. And that's kind of about it. But there's this whole other avenue in video games that agencies don't look to. So as a result, the voice talent who have been doing this for 20 plus years don't know that that work is out there, that you can get outside of your agencies. Um, so yeah, my pathway was a little bit different to a lot of the voice talent in Australia. So I found that with my job, I kind of went global before I went local.
Hmm.
So I kept very informed about the Australian game industry in terms of where they're based, in terms of what funding is like. And that's all something I go in through my workshop too, because it took up a huge portion of about half an hour. And yeah, I do actually work with quite a lot of indie game developers as well. So I work with Blowfish Studios, who are in North Sydney. I work with the team who's making Brimstone Brawlers, who's in Queensland, Invert Mouse in Sydney, Drop Bear Bites, who are based in Melbourne as well. So kind of all over the place. So I found that as of this year, that's been skyrocketing, which is really exciting because that's something I'm incredibly passionate about.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna ask if you've seen since you started to now the amount of studios around increase.
Well, that's a bit of a tricky question. So our
Yeah.
AAA studios, they've decreased.
Hmm.
It's slowly on the rise now because I don't know if you know, but Untitled Goose Game came out of Australia, which is really exciting. So it had
Hmm.
gotten like so much publicity. And it was kind of just such a win for the video game industry here in Australia. And we've had like Hollow Knight and Fruit Ninja. We've had some like huge titles, but our successes have appeared quite random in the industry. Um, so I think that as a result of Untitled Goose Game doing as well as it has, I think there's been a couple of other states in Australia who have perked up and kind of going, okay, maybe we should provide a bit more games funding. So there's been a lot of indie game studios rising up over the last few years. Some of our bigger ones have shut down, but I'm hoping that with this success, it might bring on a little bit more funding, and as a result, the whole industry will grow.
Yeah. As I said, I'm not as familiar with Australia. Do they have certain, maybe certain states or areas that give grants or anything like that to potential up and coming studios, anything like that?
Yeah, they do. So our hub is actually in Melbourne, so it's where
Mm.
44% of our indie games industry is based. So that's definitely our hub in Australia because that's huge. But we also have Screen West, so they're in Western Australia. They have only just started this year dedicating money to the Australian games industry, and it's about $100,000 grant to share with a few different studios. So sounds like a lot of money, but as we know, in terms of making games, you're looking at five figures anyway.
Hmm.
So yeah, so they dedicate it to I think it's 4 to 5 studios, but they've only just started this year. I think they delved it out in May. Whereas in Melbourne, so our games capital, we've got $30,000 grants or we've got $150,000 grants. So the 30,000 are basically given to a game for the game release. And then the $150,000 is given to the company in order to grow. Because as I'd mentioned, we have such a huge indie dev population, but not as many AAA studios. Our goal is to start creating companies and thriving instead of surviving. Um, so yeah, we've got that. Basically, the only three who aren't covered is where I'm based. So in New South
Hmm.
Wales, we don't have any games funding, and they've kind of just turned a blind eye to it all. The Northern Territory and Tasmania. I always forget about Tasmania. Um, but I believe they're the only three that don't have any funding. Oh, and maybe the ACT. Oh, I can't remember about the ACT. They might not either. But yeah, so we've got about half of Australia that's still in the dark in this regard.
It seems like there's a lot of bigger areas though. At least from what I can perceive as bigger areas, since I'm not as familiar, but I at least have a cursory knowledge of the of some of the bigger areas in Australia.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. So at least with like Melbourne in Victoria, so
Mm.
44% of game developers are there. At least they're kind of covered, so a lot of flocking over there. But then the second biggest that does cover quite a big portion of the games industry is New South Wales. So unfortunately, the second most amount of game developers are here, but there's no funding. So that's a pretty big problem that needs to be addressed. But other than that, I think everything else is kind of on the way, which is really nice.
Yeah, that's awesome to see that it's growing. Even if it's not, even if AAA is shrinking, but it's nice to see a bunch of new studios and that sort of indies popping up around Australia. That's really cool.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's really special too because it's really testing those little 1 and 2 people teams who cover more than half of the games industry here anyway, 1 to 2 people. It's really amazing to watch their journey and see what they're actually achieving without funding. Um, because yeah, that just blows my mind. So I'd mentioned Invert Mouse before. So he's developed like visual novels every single year here in New South Wales where there's no funding. And yeah, he's pumped these games out every single year. And then earlier this year, he developed a game called Clear. It went to Steam. It did really well. And now it's going to the Switch as of
Nice.
next year without funding. And I'm just like, that blows my mind. So we're finding a lot more of that there's a lot more success that have kind of just somehow made their way through a pretty difficult career.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's awesome, and it seems like the Switch has been a really good thing for indies for sure.
Definitely.
You've got your business established. You've been doing it full time for a year now. Where
Mhm.
where do you want to go next? Where does your business go next from here?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I'm gonna up my rates in January, so starting at the beginning of next year. I'm doing a lot more video game workshops as well. So I've had
Mm,
quite a lot of interest because there's not a lot of people in Australia kind of talking about it with the experience of having worked in games. I think there's a lot of people coaching it who don't cast for it and are not in it. So I do find that quite conflicting. And it was something that I didn't want to launch into because I wanted to be an exceptional voice talent before I start teaching other people. So I'm
mm,
quite brief with that portion. I don't want to be a hypocrite at all. I'm quite aware that I have some bad habits. So that takes up a very minute part of my workshop. I mainly just deliver the facts and figures and my roadmap. That's the priority. Um, but yeah, I did find that with doing this, there's been a lot of positive word around, which is really nice. I'm really flattered by that. So I think that next year I'm probably going to be doing a little bit of traveling around Australia and delving out this information into some different states because I've only done it in Melbourne. So yeah, I've had a few leads in that regard. So I think that's going to take quite a forefront of my business.
mm.
And basically just keep doing as I've done and continue marketing. And there's some really exciting stuff coming out that unfortunately I can't talk about, but it's
Right.
really, yeah, as I'm sure everyone says. But I know it's the unfun part. It's like, oh, but NDA. But yeah, so it's kind of just like waiting for that information to drop and kind of seeing what happens after that because when some exciting stuff does get released, it does open a few new doors to people who you previously couldn't speak to. So yeah, I think that's all very exciting. So I think the coaching and I think those some of those roles being dropped, opening new doors, and yeah, hopefully revamping my character demo reel as well and seeing if that opens some more opportunities.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it seems like the workshop would be a perfect fit for you since you were a teacher.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why I was kind of like, oh, I want to ensure that I'm not giving anybody any nasty habits. But yeah,
Mm,
with having that primary school teaching as well and deconstructing information and reconstructing it in interesting ways. I do love all that. I still love making PowerPoints. I didn't hate being a teacher at all. I loved it, which is why
mm,
the decision was so tough for me. I really loved my job. So it's really nice that this is once again retrospective. It's like, oh, everything happened kind of the way that it was meant to. Um, even though I didn't realize it at the time. And obviously, that's all very relevant to my work now. It's helped me whenever I've needed to present at panels, at conventions, and obviously doing the workshops as well. Um, so yeah, it's all happened the way it's meant to, which is really cool.
So, have you had any opportunities to? Because I know you started doing conventions. Have you had any opportunities to come to any conventions, outside of Australia?
Oh, I wish. um, no, not yet. I am. Oh, hold on. I do have an external agency who does help with guest appearances over in the UK. So
Mm,
I'm currently on their database. But that's about it at the moment. Yeah, I would absolutely love to. We'll just see what happens in the future. I think there's a few more stuff, a few more things I'll wait to come out and then see if it piques anyone's interest, I suppose.
yeah. So just one step at a time until you get there. But
Yeah, that's it. I mean, yeah, I've done some of our biggest ones here in Australia. So I did PAX, which was kind of our video game um hub convention in
mm,
Melbourne. So I did that one. I've done Smash. I've done like lots of little smaller conventions. I did Oz Comic Con. So I've covered most of our bigger ones. So I'm kind of thinking, like I don't know whether to let the convention panels slide and just pick up on the video game workshops or I kind of guess we'll see what happens in regards to that. But I would love to. I'd love to go overseas and do some.
Yeah, I absolutely hope that you get that opportunity. That'd be really awesome.
Yeah, I'd love it.
Um, anyway, Aimee, I want to thank you so much for being on.
Oh, no worries. Thank you for having me. This is awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome to have you. It was awesome to hear about your experience voice acting. It's really cool to know that the business aspect of everything too, because that's kind of where we fit in here at our studio. Is just trying to like throw out some information. Um,
Yeah, I'm so boring. I'm so I'm just so practical. It's not like, no, follow your heart and have stars in your eyes. I'm always like, okay, business and realism.
no,
I'm so boring.
I don't think that's boring though. I think that's the stuff that makes it interesting, because that's the stuff I think a lot of people don't hear. So I
Yeah.
think it's a good thing for people to hear about that stuff. So that's why it's been a pleasure to have you on. Um, Aimee, where can people find you if they would like to hire you or get in contact with you?
Ah, that sounds great. So my website is www.aimee, which is AIMEE, Smith VA for voice actor.com, or you can find me on Twitter at Aimee Smith VA. So they're the main two areas.
Awesome. Well, Aimee, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, thanks so much, Trevor. Really appreciate it.